Behind the fame, packed arenas, and championship belts of the UFC lies a darker side of success, one that many don't talk about.
This young woman suffered a horrific beating at the hands of her ex, a mixed martial arts star known as War Machine.
Some of the sport's biggest names lost everything, not from devastating knockouts or bad business choices,
Over the top, looking to finish it here.
but because of love, heartbreak, and scandal. From explosive relationships to shocking betrayals,
Trial date has been set for the MMA fighter accused of trying to kill his girlfriend.
these are the unbelievable stories of UFC fighters who went broke because of women. Some fighters lost their fortunes due to reckless spending or failed ventures. But Jonathan Koppenhaver, known to fans as War Machine, destroyed his life in one of the most violent and disturbing crimes in MMA history. Once a promising star in the UFC and Bellator, War Machine had fame, sponsors, and loyal supporters. But his uncontrollable anger outside the cage ruined it all, including his freedom. War Machine wasn't just aggressive in fights.
Top of the mount position and just explodes with every last...
He was unstable in real life. Long before his infamous crime, he made headlines for public outbursts, angry social media posts, and street altercations. But in 2014, his violent behavior reached its worst point.
Local MMA fighter wanted for a vicious attack on his ex-girlfriend is behind bars tonight. The manhunt for War Machine involved Dog the Bounty Hunter.
One night, he broke into the home of his ex-girlfriend, Christy Mack, and launched a brutal attack that nearly ended her life. She suffered multiple broken bones, missing teeth, and serious internal injuries, while a male friend who was with her was also beaten. When Christy Mack shared photos of her injuries online, the MMA world turned on War Machine instantly. Police quickly hunted him down, and he was charged with several felonies, including assault, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Even before his trial began, his career and finances were completely gone. At one time, War Machine earned well from fights, sponsorships, and appearances, but after the assault, it all vanished overnight. Big brands like Tapout and Hayabusa immediately cut ties. His legal battles drained what was left of his money, as attorney fees, restitution, and court costs reportedly went beyond $1 million. With no fights, no sponsorships, and no income, War Machine was left bankrupt and broken. When his trial ended, the judge sentenced him to 36 years to life, sealing his fate forever.
War Machine was sentenced today to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years.
Unlike other fighters who lost their money and tried to rebuild, War Machine never got a second chance. His own rage cost him his career, his wealth, and his freedom. He went from main events to a prison cell, proving that sometimes the most dangerous opponent a fighter faces is himself. What's your take? Did War Machine deserve redemption, or was his downfall something he brought on himself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's move to Mike Perry, a man who was chaotic in the cage and even more unpredictable outside of it. He's known for throwing bombs during fights. But when it comes to managing money, his approach has been as wild as his fighting style. Between tax problems, bad spending habits, and relationship chaos, Perry's life has been a non-stop roller coaster. He's not just known for his striking power, his off-cage behavior has made just as many headlines. From public fights and bar altercations to his infamous stunt of selling a corner spot to fans for cash, Perry always manages to keep people talking. Despite earning multiple performance of the night bonuses and pulling in solid paydays, he struggled to hold on to his money. His financial troubles stem from reckless spending, unpaid taxes, and poor personal choices. In 2019, Perry admitted he owed thousands in back taxes. By 2020, things got so bad that he tried auctioning off a sponsorship space in his fight corner, a move some called clever, but many saw as desperate. His legal problems only made things worse. Perry got into a violent argument at a Florida restaurant, allegedly punched an older man, and had police called on him several times. The legal fees and fines added up fast, draining his income. But his biggest downfall came from his personal life. His ex-wife, Danielle Nickerson, accused him of domestic violence, saying he physically assaulted her multiple times. The aftermath was devastating. Not only did it hurt him legally and emotionally, but it also crushed him financially. Sponsors abandoned him, and any brand partnerships he had were gone. Already deep in tax debt and legal trouble, Perry kept spending recklessly recklessly on luxury cars, expensive trips, and impulsive purchases, as if the money would never run out. At one point, his net worth was estimated around $1 million, but if his habits continued, that number could drop fast. Still, Perry remains a fan favorite. He's entertaining, unpredictable, and continues to make money from fights and appearances. But with his spending habits, tax issues, and past relationship problems, the real question isn't whether he'll win another fight. It's whether he can stop fighting himself long enough to stay financially afloat. Next up is Josh Grisby, a fighter once seen as a rising star destined for greatness. At one point, he was scheduled to fight Jose Aldo for the UFC featherweight title. With a 14-1 record, his career was booming. Many believed he would be the next big name in the sport, but instead of becoming a champion, Grisby's life collapsed in one of the most shocking downfalls in MMA history. At his peak, Grisby was one of the most feared featherweights in the UFC. His quick knockouts and aggressive style earned him the nickname The Fluke. Some used it to downplay his success, but he used it as motivation to prove his critics wrong. Everything seemed to be going his way until his personal life began to fall apart. In 2014, Grisby was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including domestic violence, drug possession, and firearm violations. Reports described years of severe abuse toward his wife, which prosecutors called one of the worst cases of domestic violence they had ever seen. It was even reported that he commanded his own pet dog to attack her before physically assaulting her himself. The details shocked the MMA community. His wife had suffered repeated violence, and authorities described it as one of the most horrifying domestic cases they'd encountered. After his arrest, Grisby's life collapsed completely. His reputation was destroyed, and all his sponsors and promotions cut ties immediately. The man who once had a title shot and the potential for million-dollar paydays suddenly had nothing. His income vanished, and what little money he had went to paying lawyers and court costs. The UFC released him, and no other fight promotion wanted to be associated with him. No gym would hire him, and no brand wanted their name linked to his. Grisby went from training for world titles to fighting for his life behind bars. He had the skills, talent, and opportunities most fighters dream about, but his self-destructive choices ended it all. His anger and violence didn't just end his career, they ended his entire future. Now, instead of competing in UFC main events, Grisby sits behind bars, broke, forgotten, and disgraced. His story stands as one of the clearest examples of how a fighter's greatest battle isn't always inside the cage, but within themselves. Speaking of self-destruction, few stories in the UFC show it better than Melvin Gillard's. He was once one of the most explosive fighters the sport had ever seen, known for his lightning-fast knockouts, highlight finishes, and a 5-fight win streak that had fans calling him a future champion. But no amount of knockout power could protect him from his worst enemy, his own reckless choices outside the cage. From drug use to domestic violence charges, Gillard's personal life quickly unraveled, draining his money and destroying his career. When the legal problems started piling up, the paychecks stopped coming, sponsors walked away, and what could have been a legendary career fell apart faster than anyone imagined. At his peak, Gillard was known for his aggressive striking and fearless style. He claimed huge wins over top names like Evan Dunham, Dennis Siver, and Jeremy Stevens. Between 2010 and 2011, he looked unstoppable. Many believed he was on his way to UFC gold. But while fans were cheering him on inside the cage, his personal life outside of it was in chaos. It all began in 2007 when he tested positive for cocaine. The UFC suspended him, fined him, and sent a clear message. That should have been his warning to change, but it wasn't. Gillard came back, determined to fight again, but his self-destructive behavior continued. Then came 2018, the year everything completely collapsed. Gillard was arrested and charged with several felonies, including domestic violence and assault at a Denver nightclub. According to reports, he attacked his girlfriend, striking her multiple times. Security footage backed up the story, and when investigators dug deeper, they found a disturbing history of similar incidents. This wasn't a single bad night, it was part of a long pattern of violence. The fallout was immediate. Sponsors dropped him without hesitation. Promoters refused to book him. Practically overnight, his income vanished. Without a UFC contract, Gillard was forced to fight for smaller promotions, often for a fraction of his old pay, and whatever little he earned went straight to legal costs, fines, and mandatory court programs. When he was finally sentenced to probation and ordered into anger management, Gillard had hit rock bottom, both financially and professionally. He had all the natural talent in the world, but talent doesn't matter when bad choices never stop. His domestic violence case didn't just cause scandal, it cost him everything. nothing. No more big paydays, no more UFC spotlight, and no more sponsorships. Instead of fighting for a world title, Guillard was now fighting just to survive. What should have been a $1 million career turned into a paycheck-to-paycheck struggle, all because of his own mistakes. Melvin Guillard once had everything. Now, he stands as proof that no level of skill can protect you from the consequences of your own actions. Now, let's move on to Chris Lieben, a man who fought like a wild storm in the cage and lived just as recklessly outside it. A fan favorite since the very first season of The Ultimate Fighter, Lieben became known for his knockout power, granite chin, and fearless brawling style. But the same chaos that made him thrilling to watch inside the octagon followed him into his personal life. Addiction, legal issues, and a toxic relationship tore his life apart. His struggle with drugs and alcohol drained his bank account, but it was the legal battle with his ex-wife that finally wiped him out. At his peak, Lieben was one of the most entertaining fighters the UFC had. He scored memorable wins over legends like Wanderlei Silva and Yoshihiro Akiyama, surviving brutal wars and always pushing forward no matter how much punishment he took. Fans loved his toughness, and the UFC paid him well. On paper, he should have been financially secure, but behind closed doors, his money was slipping through his fingers. Years of alcohol and painkiller abuse ate away at his income, and his unpredictable spending left him constantly broke no matter how big his fight purses were. By 2015, it all came crashing down. Lieben's marriage had ended, but the fallout only got worse when he violated a restraining order by breaking into his ex-wife's apartment while carrying a loaded firearm. Her family was inside at the time. The police arrested him, and he faced multiple felony charges. What followed was financial devastation, lawyer fees, fines, and lost sponsorships left him with nothing. Without a UFC contract or major fights to fall back on, Lieben's career and finances were both ruined. When he tried to rebuild his life, it was already too late. The damage had been done. Years of reckless choices left him broke, with his reputation shattered. Instead of enjoying a quiet retirement, Lieben had to fight in smaller leagues and even turn to bare-knuckle boxing just to survive. He had the talent, the fame, and the fan base, but in the end, it wasn't the battles inside the cage that broke him. It was the ones outside of it. Speaking of self-inflicted chaos, let's talk about Jon Jones, a man widely considered the greatest fighter in MMA history, yet one whose personal life nearly destroyed everything he built. Bones Jones has a resume filled with titles, records, and glory, but behind that success is a long list of scandals that cost him millions. Legal problems, drug suspensions, and public controversies have followed him for years, but one of the biggest contributors to his downfall, his relationships and his reckless decisions involving women. In 2015, Jones crashed his SUV into another car, driven by a pregnant woman. She suffered a broken arm. Instead of helping, Jones did something unbelievable. He ran from the scene, but not before grabbing a handful of cash from his vehicle. Witnesses saw everything, and police quickly issued a warrant for his arrest. The charge? Felony hit and run. What could have been a bad accident turned into a career-threatening disaster. The financial impact was massive. The UFC stripped him of his title, cutting off championship-level paydays. Major sponsors like Nike and MuscleTech dropped him, costing him millions in endorsement deals. The UFC suspended him indefinitely, leaving his career and earnings in limbo. Though he avoided prison time through a plea deal, the damage to his reputation and his bank account was permanent. You'd think that losing millions would make him change course, but it didn't. In 2021, Jones was arrested again, this time for domestic violence after police found his fiancée, Jessie Moses, with visible injuries and blood on her clothes. Jones denied hurting her, and the charges were dropped through a plea deal, but the backlash was devastating. Even his longtime gym, Jackson Wink MMA, banned him from training there. That's how bad things had gotten. His own team didn't want him back. By this point, Jones was bleeding money. He had no sponsorships, no reliable support system, and another round of legal costs to handle. His image took another hit in 2023 when reports surfaced that he allegedly threatened a female drug testing official. If convicted, it could mean more fines, more legal trouble, and yet another blow to his already damaged career. He pleaded not guilty, but the repeated scandals had already pushed sponsors and fans away. Jon Jones should have been the richest UFC fighter of all time. Instead, his own actions have cost him millions. His personal decisions, legal problems, and public controversies have overshadowed his greatness inside the cage. Now, the only question left is, can Jon Jones ever truly recover, or has he done too much damage to fix his legacy? What do you think? Can he make a comeback, or has he permanently destroyed everything he worked for. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Now let's talk about John Fitch, once one of the top welterweights in the UFC, a title contender, and one of the most respected grapplers in mixed martial arts. But even with all his achievements, none of that could protect him from the financial downfall that came after his divorce. In 2018, Fitch's marriage came to an end, and with it went a huge part of his wealth. Between legal expenses, settlements, and the cost of starting life over, Fitch ended up in a financial hole that he never completely climbed out of. At his peak, Fitch was among the best welterweights in the world. He challenged for the UFC championship in 2008, built an impressive winning streak, and faced some of the sport's biggest stars. But even at that level, MMA wasn't exactly a path to long-term wealth. The divorce took a serious toll on his finances, and unfortunately, it wasn't the only thing draining his money. At the same time, Fitch was also locked in a legal battle with the UFC. He and several fighters filed a class action lawsuit claiming that UFC contracts were unfair and stopped them from earning money outside the promotion. They compared their earnings to athletes in major leagues like the NFL and NBA, where players receive nearly half of total league revenue, while UFC fighters were paid only a small fraction of that. Fitch believed fighters deserved fair pay and more control over their careers, but taking the UFC to court wasn't cheap. Between the costs of fighting a major organization in court and the financial hit from his divorce, Fitch found himself struggling to stay financially stable. Once a championship contender, he was now trying to find new ways to make a living. He turned to coaching, podcasting, and other ventures, hoping to rebuild a stable life after fighting. Coaching brought in some income, but not enough. His podcast attracted attention from MMA fans, but earnings were inconsistent. He tried his hand at different business opportunities, but none of them came close to matching the paydays from his UFC career. Like many fighters before him, Fitch learned a painful truth. MMA doesn't prepare you for what happens after your fighting days are over. Once you stop competing, the money stops coming in, and unless you've planned carefully, the financial struggles can hit hard. Add a costly divorce to the mix, and the stress becomes almost impossible to ignore. Fitch had fought some of the toughest opponents in the world, but his biggest defeats came outside the octagon. Between a difficult divorce and a drawn-out legal war with the UFC, his financial stability was left hanging by a thread. His story serves as a warning for fighters who think winning titles or holding belts guarantees lifelong wealth. In this sport, if you're not careful, it's easy to lose everything, even when you've stopped throwing punches. Now, this next story is especially interesting. Up to this point, we've been talking about male fighters whose downfalls were tied to women, but there are also female fighters who faced financial ruin because of how other women treated them. One of the clearest examples of this is Alice Ardelin, a Romanian strawweight who found herself not only fighting opponents in the cage, but also battling judgment from the MMA community itself. Ardelin was a talented and determined fighter with big potential, but like many others in her position, she struggled to make ends meet. Training, travel, and daily expenses added up, and traditional sponsorships and fight purses weren't enough. To keep her career alive, she turned to OnlyFans as a source of income. It was a practical move, but instead of receiving support, she faced harsh backlash that nearly destroyed her career. She was banned from several gyms, lost sponsors, and became the target of criticism, not because of how she performed in fights, but because of how she earned her money. The most surprising part? Many of the complaints came from the wives of trainers and other fighters who disapproved of her decision to create content online. For most fighters, the road to the UFC is tough. They take low-paying fights, juggle multiple jobs, and depend on sponsors just to afford proper training. For Ardelin, OnlyFans was a way to survive financially and continue competing, but the cost of that decision was enormous. Some gyms outright banned her, claiming they didn't want drama or discomfort caused by jealous partners. Losing access to those training facilities meant losing top-level coaching and sparring partners. Forced to find new places to train, she ended up paying more and traveling farther, spending most of her earnings just to keep fighting. The backlash didn't end there. Potential sponsors refused to work with her, not wanting their brands associated with her online presence. While male fighters could pose shirtless or promote products without criticism, Ardelin was shut out of endorsement deals. Her reputation became tainted, not because of lack of talent, but because of the double standards within the industry. Ardelin's struggle wasn't about ability or dedication. It was about being judged unfairly for trying to support herself. While male fighters bragged about their side hustles and brand deals, she was treated as an outsider and pushed away from the very sport she worked so hard to to be part of. Even after showing that she could fund her career independently, without relying on underpaid fight contracts or shady sponsorships, she still faced rejection from fans, fighters, and MMA promotions alike. In the end, Alice Ardelane's story is one of both resilience and loss. She turned to OnlyFans to keep her fighting career alive, but the price she paid was steep. She lost access to top gyms, lost sponsors, and faced ongoing disrespect from her peers. The MMA world that she had dedicated her life to ended up turning its back on her simply because she found an unconventional way to make money. She wasn't just fighting opponents in the cage, she was fighting to prove she even belonged in the sport at all. Alice Ardelane's experience shows that in MMA, the toughest battles aren't always physical. Sometimes they're about survival, reputation, and the cost of independence. Speaking of fighters and money, let's move on to one of the biggest names in combat sports, Conor McGregor. He's one of the richest fighters in history and one of the most famous faces in MMA. But despite earning hundreds of millions, McGregor has also lost over $10 million because of bad choices and personal chaos. Legal cases, lawsuits, and failed business ventures have all drained his wealth, and many of his biggest financial losses came from conflicts involving women. McGregor's problems go far beyond bar fights or public outbursts. In 2018, he was found liable for assaulting a woman in a Dublin hotel, and the case reportedly cost him over $1 million in damages. But the greater damage wasn't just the settlement, it was the collapse of his public image and his sponsorships. Brands like Reebok, Beats by Dre, Monster Energy, and even Burger King cut ties with him, costing him an estimated $5 million in lost deals. Then there's his complicated personal life. Over the years, McGregor has faced paternity claims, restraining orders, and multiple accusations from past relationships, all of which fueled controversy and led to expensive settlements and legal fees. Many of these cases were resolved privately, but the total costs added up to millions. His reputation suffered heavily. The scandals didn't just end his sponsorships, they also affected his businesses. A major endorsement with a global sports brand was canceled, and even his whiskey company, Proper No. 12, felt the hit. After his legal troubles made headlines, the brand reportedly saw sales drop by about 20%. Investors grew hesitant, expansion plans were delayed, and the business lost momentum. McGregor had planned to turn Proper No. 12 into a worldwide powerhouse, but after the lawsuits and bad publicity, investors weren't eager to attach themselves to his name. Despite all the money he's made, his wealth isn't endless, and the combination of lawsuits, bad press, and personal drama continues to chip away at his fortune. Today, Conor McGregor is still one of the sport's biggest stars, but even the largest bank accounts have their limits. If he continues down this path, he could end up like other fighters who saw their empires crumble because of personal mistakes. What do you think? Is Conor McGregor heading toward financial ruin, or can he still turn things around before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to MMA Rivals so you don't miss the next ones.